So, how do you lead and influence people in a matrix organization? People in different divisions that you need to influence in order to get things done. This is going to be the topic of this week's Impactful Teamwork. And super delighted to be here with you again today. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Julia Felton. I'm going to be your host and guide while we delve into this subject of influence and collaboration in a matrixed organization. And I'm prompted to share some information with you today about this because it was one of the biggest challenges I had in my corporate career when I worked in a global role. So I was working across geographies and also across a lot of different divisions. But it's also one of the things that I'm typically coaching a lot of my clients on. And there has been some recent research from the Center of Creative Leadership that also backs this up. So I wanted to intertwine everything together and share something with you about this today. Because I think it's really important as leaders, we learn to build relationships across the organization. And in fact, the more connections and relationships we can have outside of our teams, the more meaningful the results can be. And yet people seem to really struggle and find creating these types of relationships difficult. I think in today's organizations more than ever, where our organizations are defined by complexity and interconnectedness, we have to transform and protect what we call our boundaries within the organization. I think successful leaders today are those who can work with a variety of colleagues in different positions, different business functions, backgrounds, locations, and experience. The Center for Creative Leadership refers to this as something called boundary spanning leadership. And they define it as the capability to establish, direct, align, and commit across boundaries in service of a higher vision or goal. So what's an example of that? Representing your team to stakeholders, working on projects across departments, seeking information from outside experts. And this collaboration is important at all levels of leadership, across all groups and teams, and across the larger organization and systems. And what are the benefits of spanning boundaries? I think leaders who effectively collaborate across boundaries in the workplace have the advantage when faced with solving problems, creating innovative solutions, and evolving to thrive in today's interdependent, complex world. And what are some of the benefits? They are increased organizational agility to respond to the dynamic marketplace, breakthrough innovations across the organization, the achievement of mission-critical bottom-line results, and an engaged and empowered workplace at all times, flexible cross-functional learning capabilities to solve problems and adapt to change, better manage risks and rewards through enduring cross-sector partnerships, high-performing virtual remote and hybrid teams, and a global mindset and cross-regional collaboration. And what some of the research from the Center for Creative Leadership discovered was that people who consistently spanned boundaries, in other words, created relationships with people in different areas of the organization, were seen as more influential within their teams, while those who failed to make these connections were granted far less influence. And I know from my own personal experience of working at Deloitte and Arthur Andersen, the power of forming relationships with people in other teams and other divisions across the organization. So let me just share one example with you. I used to get a lot of my work printed. I had monthly reports going out to my clients, hundreds and hundreds of them. So I always needed those to get printed at the end of the month. And in usual fashion, there was usually a pretty tight deadline to get that stuff turned around. Now, not consciously, I've got to admit, this was something that happened very unconsciously. I actually formed a really great relationship with all of the people in the print room. And I used to go down and get my printing and talk to them. And we just had a bit of a rapport going on. What I do know is every single time I was up with a pressure deadline, these guys always got my printing out on time and they always jumped me up the queue. And I didn't probably really appreciate that at the time. But looking back on it, I feel really fortunate. And one thing that really stood out to me was when I was made a director of the firm and an internal email went out announcing all the promotions and the fact that I'd been promoted to director. And I've been going down to the print room for years and years collecting my own printing. And I never forget the guys in the print room saying to me that day, they're like, "Julia, are you a director of the firm?" I was like, "Yeah." And they were so shocked that somebody at the level of director was coming down to get their own printing. But as I said, the rewards for me doing that in terms of what I was able to get done for my team were incredible. And that is the value of investing in relationships and spanning these boundaries and forming relationships with people in different teams across the organization, because you never know who can help you out. What's really interesting is that 86% of top leaders think it's extremely important to collaborate effectively across boundaries in their leadership roles. However, only 7% of executives report feeling very effective at doing this. So we've got a massive gap of 79 percentage points. So clearly, this is an important skill set that many of us can improve. And how do we close that skill set? It's by developing collaborative skills, mindsets, and behaviors. But let's just recognize there are a number of challenges in creating these relationships across different areas of the organization. And there's been 5 different types of boundaries within the organizational structures that have been identified. And they require different tactics and skills, often to produce different benefits. So the first type of boundaries are horizontal. So these are perhaps the ones we think of the most. These are like between the different functions within the organization. So between sales, between marketing, between IT, between finance, between operations. There's also horizontal boundaries between different peers as well on the same level within the organization. Then we have vertical boundaries. So these are hierarchical levels within the organization. So these might be between directors and middle line managers, new starters, or between seniority and authority and power. So vertical hierarchical levels within the organization. Then we've got stakeholder boundaries, and these with external groups, so customers, partners, other communities that we work with, suppliers. Then we've got demographic boundaries, and this is within various groups. So this could be based on gender, generation, nationality, personality, for example. And then geographic boundaries across locations, regions, markets, and distance. And actually, when I look at these 5 types of boundaries, probably the 2 that were most prevalent for me were horizontal, geographic, stakeholder, and then obviously within my own team, vertical. Those were probably the most prevalent that I ever experienced. And I think I was fortunate in terms of building horizontal boundaries within my role, because I had a central role, I had a global role, and so I got to see a lot that was happening within the organization. And some of you will know that one of my biggest frustrations working in the corporate sector was all the wasted time, energy, and resources I often saw, because I interacted with a number of different parts of the organization. And I often knew that one team was working on a project and another team was working on a similar project. And there was the opportunity to share resources and collaborate, but they didn't know about each other and they didn't know that could exist. So I often was a conduit between hooking people together. CCL, the Center for Creative Leadership's research showed that horizontal boundaries are the most valuable for leaders, but they're also the hardest. And so remember, horizontal boundaries separate organizational groups by areas of experience and expertise. And I think sometimes we see this level of collaboration not happening because there is a threat. One department feels threatened by another. And so they hoard resources and don't share them with one another. But what the research showed was facilitating cross-functional collaboration is one of the most common issues leaders face, and it speaks directly to the challenge of a lack of collaboration. And what the research also showed was that people are more likely to drop these types of relationships once maybe they feel in any way threatened within the organization, or once they feel they've got enough from that department for that particular project, they move on. And what I would encourage you to do as a leader is maintain as many of these relationships as you can. You never know when you're going to need to pull on them in the future. And the fact that you've invested time and energy in building that relationship is very powerful. And why is that? I think it's because what we tend to find is these relationships get dropped because they're actually more difficult to maintain than having a relationship with somebody in your own team. And yet, of course, the irony is that these horizontal boundaries are a great conduit for sharing of new information and ideas. The more, if you think about them as feelers that you've got out into other divisions in other areas of the organization, the more you'll know about what is going on within the organization and how that's going to impact you and your team, either positively or negatively. A really unintended consequence of the matrixed and regional structures that we find in many organizations nowadays is that unintentionally we have created walls between groups that need to be collaborating together. When this happens, managers and leaders end up spending a lot of time silo busting, breaking down the silos between these different groups that unintentionally they had created. We've also got to remember that boundary spanning also entails creating robust ties to our external stakeholders across the teams. And the research found that effective boundary spanning emerges largely due to strong team-to-team relationships. So the better our relationships between teams, between our customers, between us and our suppliers, the better the results will be for the organization. Now, what about vertical boundaries? These are boundaries within different levels of seniority and authority and power. And interestingly, the research showed that vertical boundaries were the least frequently cited challenge in terms of building relationships. Although the boundaries are perhaps less challenging to create, and it's easier to form relationships in this vertical axis between managers and team members, senior executive leaders, and middle management, for example. What's really important in order for these relationships to flourish and for us to have effective relationships, it's really important that we create that psychological safety. Because otherwise, team members aren't going to feel comfortable voicing their concerns and sharing information, particularly up the hierarchy. So Just think about that. If we want to build better relationships in the vertical sphere between different levels within the organization, we've got to be seen as trustworthy. We've got to be seen as reliable. We've got to be seen as confidential. We've got to be seen as supportive, and we've got to create that culture where people feel that they can share. It's really important, though, that whilst vertical boundaries are perhaps the easiest for us to create and maintain, we need to be careful that we don't fall into the trap of those are the only boundaries that we're working on. Otherwise, we quickly find ourselves in a siloed organization where our expertise remains locked within just a set pocket within the organization. So what's the solution? The solution for most business challenges often rests at the intersection of multiple boundaries. And this is why truly effective leadership involves creating direction, alignment, and commitment across these key boundaries. Because most leaders find it difficult to lead outside our box in the organizational chart, across the lines of stakeholder interests, or beyond the borders of the division that we represent. And sometimes the effort involved in actually collaborating across borders can at times feel taxing and straining. It can be done. I've done it. I didn't really appreciate all of this that I'm sharing with you at the time, but I guess I naturally had to do it because that is what my job needed. I think of a time when I was working in the global roles. We wanted to launch a hotel performance survey down in South Africa. So I needed to interact and build relationships with the head of the Deloitte division down in South Africa. And then I needed to build relationships with the associate that they had put on the ground to lead the project for them. So I was having to work across geography, across function, across vertical, across different levels within the organization as well. I think I just naturally did it because it was something that I had to do. Nothing would happen within my team if I didn't build those relationships, because I was always reliant on the partners within other countries to help support me in enrolling hotels into the hotel benchmark survey, and then to distribute and get visibility within their countries about the value of the survey and how it could help the industry out there, which of course in turn helped the local managing partner in that country gain a higher profile through press and potentially bring in more work. So we were creating a win-win within this relationship. So what are 3 universal strategies that organizations can use to effectively span the boundaries? And the first one is managing the boundaries. The first step to spanning boundaries is to create or strengthen them if some already exist. Seek to understand the unique value set, skills, and expectation that members of your team and those on other teams bring to collaborative work. Well-managed boundaries build this psychological safety and respect that we've been talking about. The second strategy is around forging common ground. By cultivating and nurturing relationships with people of diverse backgrounds, disciplines, and roles. When we connect on a personal level, we build trust and we're able to have more candid communication. So we want to really identify issues, priorities, and challenges which can collectively build and mobilize towards a more common goal. And finally, a third universal strategy you might consider is discovering new frontiers by combining the unique capabilities within your team with those of others. So when you can build that on the previous strategies of managing boundaries and forging common ground, you can develop a highly informed, opportunistic, and agile network that functions as a team of teams. And groups weave and link with differentiated expertise, experience, and resources, but they're guided by that integrated vision and strategy to support the innovation, transformation, and reinvention. That's really what I was doing in my role in corporate. I was discovering these new frontiers and bringing different people together in order to create something new that had never been seen before. So managing boundaries clarifies how to operate with one another. And it is the foundation upon which collective outcomes are built. And if the foundation is insecure, anything built on it is compromised. So what are some of the tactics for managing these boundaries? We might think about creating a boundary-spanning team charter to clarify the shared purpose as well as roles and responsibilities. And you can have a team create a charter for their own group and then share that with each other. It's also about asking powerful questions of one another to learn about other partners' values and assumptions. You might want to consider allowing team members to shadow one another for half a day and then share insights afterwards. And also practice putting on the other shoe by taking time during, say, internal meetings to ask the group, how would our partner think about this? And when we've identified and managed the boundaries facing the team, then we're able to prioritize common ground. The tactics for forging foreign ground are around things like seeking out connection with other groups you don't interact with, because they may add value. You maybe want to link with a couple of your team's immediate stakeholders who you normally interact with. When engaging with collaboration outside the team, make time for personal updates, and this can deepen these relationships. And this is why we've been talking a lot about conscious connection. This is when we're making time to actually learn and build relationships and build rapport with other people. So it's just not always about the work that needs to get done. We want to take a vested interest in finding out about the other person. And it's always good to bring different groups together to discuss ongoing conflict and invite different perspectives on the issue. Because this is a way that we can strive to identify areas of agreement which can be built upon whilst respecting differences. And I think as leaders, one thing we really need to be conscious of is the fact that sometimes we can create performance targets that reinforce this silo mentality. And I'd really like you to think about how you could replace that with new collaborative performance standards that discourage competition between groups. I've seen this time and time again when one of the reasons for the lack of collaboration between areas is that if one team needs to give up a resource, it means that they might not meet their target and the other team will. So you can understand why people are reluctant to do it, but actually Team A needs to give up their resource to Team B, because only if Team B has the resource will we be able to meet the customer demands. So we've got to think about the picture a lot more holistically rather than just hoard resources within our own team. So one of the things I would also encourage you to do is think about the law of Kaizen. I'm not suggesting you need to go out and form loads and loads of relationships and span boundaries all at once. Sometimes just that 1% shift by maintaining just one or two additional connections can reap meaningful benefits. And finally, some tactics for discovering new frontiers. One of the things you could do here is within your organization, you could partner with an organization in a completely different sector to tackle a shared problem. So within corporate, I formed a joint venture with actually my US competitor. And some of you might think that's strange, forming a joint venture with your competitor, but we were geographically different. They did the US and Canada. I did performance metrics in the rest of the world. And this is incredibly beneficial for all of us because we got to share data between ourselves. But importantly, it now meant that we could provide a one-stop shop to our customers, the global hotel industry, that really wanted that. They didn't want different data providers for different regions of the world. They wanted a seamless one-stop shop for everything. So actually, joining with a competitor could actually be really beneficial for you and your customers. You also might want to experiment. We talked a lot about experimentation on the podcast. Small scale projects that cross boundaries, something where you can gain experience, put your toe in the water and see what's worked. And finally, I'd really encourage you to challenge any existing boundaries that seem to impede collaboration. They really deserve to be removed or reinvented. One of the things I have observed is that effective leaders find ways to generate change and co-create innovative solutions and contribute to their organizations and communities by spanning these boundaries each and every day. And so that would be my invitation to you today, is to think about how can you build relationships that span boundaries within your organization? What are you intentionally going to try and do this week? What's one relationship that you can start investing in to build with somebody in a different area? Whether that's spanning horizontal boundaries, vertical boundaries, stakeholder boundaries, demographic boundaries, or geographic boundaries. What are you going to do today that will start making a massive difference in the years to come? So I hope you found that really insightful, because building relationships that span these different areas of the organization is absolutely vital for your own personal success, your team's success, and overall the business's success. The more that we have relationships with people in other teams, the more that we know what they're doing, the more we can collaborate together, and the more effective the organization can be. So I really hope you've enjoyed that episode. And until next time, I hope you have an amazing week. Bye-bye.